Welcome to Tech Support, a podcast of Mount Juliet Church of Christ, where we encourage and equip people to interact with the biblical text. We are your hosts, Brian LeMasters and Tim Martin.
Today we're going to continue our series on the odd, the strange, and the bizarre by looking at Jephthah's vow. We're going to read some of the passages about this, but I'm going to give some background. But Judges 11 is where we'll be, and so I'm going to kind of give a real quick background summary to get us up to the point where Brian's going to do some reading about his particular vow. And then we'll also do some reading about what happened after his vow. But just as a background, Jephthah is from Gilead. He does not have a noble, at least a noble birth. He was the son of a prostitute, but he is mentioned to be a mighty warrior. Gilead is his dad's name, and he had some other children with his wife. And Gilead's, I guess you'd call them half brothers, rejected him. He said, "You get out," kicked him out of the clan. Said, "You're not going to have any inheritance. You're not going to take our father's inheritance. Eventually, you're the son of a prostitute," and he leaves there, and he essentially joins a band of rebels. He's like a modern day or ancient day Billy the Kid with some outlaws, and goes around raiding and things. And so he has kind of a pretty nasty background, if you will. And comes along that the Ammonites, kind of a particular enemy of Israel, come along and they want to fight with Israel about some land that they say Israel took from them. And then they go back all of a sudden. Now they want Jephthah back because he's a mighty warrior. And they're like, "Well, hey, you know what? We need you to help us out a little bit here." And he's like, "Hey, don't you remember you kicked me out?" Mm-hmm. And really the way it reads, they're like, yeah, but that was, but don't worry, never mind that. We need you to come back. Yeah, so we did, but we're coming to you now. And he makes a deal with him. He says, "I'll be your military general, your leader. I'll take care of this problem, but in return, I get to be the head over you. I get to be in charge."
He ain't doing that for free.
No, and I wouldn't do it either. I wouldn't do that for free. And so we really have an interesting judge here, if you will, that doesn't necessarily get appointed or recruited by Yahweh. Is we have a guy who's going to kind of be over these people of Gilead because of the task that he does for you. So he reaches out to the king of the Ammonites the first time.
Hey, Tim, and before we go further than that, I think that's a good point there, is that the rhythm in most of Judges here is the people turn their backs on God. They end up getting some foreign entity will come in and oppress them and take over them. Then they'll be like, "Oh, we need God again," cry out to God, and God will like raise up a judge for them. But so you bring that up as like, this is, in my mind, very unique, breaking away from that rhythm to where it's almost like the people are just handling it themselves.
They're just going out on their own. And of course, when we say all of Israel, it's kind of tough because it's like in just of Gilead here. But they're called cycles. You have these different judges, Abimelech, Samson. Usually you'll see them referred to as cycles. So this is like the Jephthah cycle going through it. But that's exactly right. The minute that judge drops dead, Israel goes right back to doing what they were doing before. And so the leaders, when Jephthah says, "Hey, here's the deal. I'm going to be your head if I win this thing," they swear an oath in front of God, "The Lord will be my witness, that we'll surely do as you say." So Jephthah takes them at their word. He reaches out to the king of the Ammonites. He sends an emissary and message and says, "Hey, what is it between you and I? What's going on that's any big deal?" And the Ammonites come back. King says, "Hey, it's because you took my land. When y'all come up out of Israel, you took our land." It's described as from Arnon to the Jabbok and to the Jordan. Now, I don't have a map of that, but some area down in the southern part of Israel. And so then Jephthah gets that response. He responds back, says, "Oh, no, we took that really actually from somebody else. When we were trying to come into the promised land, this king and that king and other kings wouldn't let us cross their land because they didn't trust us. And I wouldn't have either. As a massive number of Israelites that we see listed, I wouldn't let those people come into my land either because they're going could easily overpower you. And I wouldn't trust you either." And so it winds up being that it really wasn't taken from that king, but was taken from those who were in power, I guess probably 3 or 4 centuries earlier, timing-wise.
Yeah, and that's different than our day and age, like to now, where if a country goes in and tries to like invade another country, everyone else in the world would be like, "Hey, for the most part, you can't do that," and we'll like support them.
Well, they're supposed to do that.
They
don't currently do a very good job.
Not always, but but there's more pressure from the world to not do that. You're on your own here, unless you can come up with some truce with another partnership with another country. They got a point of why they didn't let them come through.
Yes, and we got to understand that these people's land means something to them differently than maybe our land means to us today. It's very, very important. And so the king of the Ammonites just doesn't respond to him in the end. And so Jephthah is ready to go up and go to war against him. And I think that may be the part we're going to read, picking up in verse 29, I think, in chapter 11.
All right. Well, chapter 11, verse 29 through 31. Then the Spirit of the Lord was upon Jephthah, and he passed through Gilead and Manasseh, and passed on to Mizpah of Gilead. And from Mizpah of Gilead he passed on to the Ammonites. And Jephthah made a vow to the Lord and said, if you will give me the Ammonites into my hand, then whatever comes out from the door of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the Ammonites shall be the Lord's, and I will offer it up for a burnt offering. Kind of crazy.
But I mean, crazy to us is what I would say.
Yes. When you read that, you're like, okay, a lot of questions come to my mind here. Mm-hmm. The first one is he, in the dialogue with previously before this, you see some trust or some acknowledgement of the power of God, mm-hmm. That it's not going to be him that causes this victory to occur. He acknowledges it will be God who would give this victory. Mm-hmm. But here he seems like he's having to almost back God into a corner or persuade God, hey, if you will do this, I'll do this for you. Mm-hmm. Which just seems kind of odd to me. One, he makes a vow. What was he expecting to come out of the house? That's a question that we're going to wrestle with. Right.
Yeah.
As we go through this.
Yeah. Are you want to hear the
And then the other thing was, for us in our day and age, sometimes we think lying's not a big deal. Just in our culture, if you make a vow and then it turns out to where you're like, oh, you know what? That's not actually going to help me. People won't think that poorly of me if I just break that promise.
In the South, we call it crawfishing. You go crawfish on somebody. You don't know that.
No.
You don't. That's not in your Indiana ease. Yes.
That's what people call it.
You know how a crawfish swims?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what
shoots off backwards.
Yeah, that's a real thing. You learn something.
Well, maybe I'm not the only one.
Yeah.
They don't learn anything about the Bible. They at least learn one thing today.
That's right. They're crawfishing on you.
So, Tim, walk us through maybe what would be different in this culture versus us today when we think of a vow being made.
Well, one of these things is today people say the words, I swear to God, all the time. If you watch any law enforcement show, every criminal says, I wasn't doing it. I swear to God. I swear to God. And they're blatantly lying. We use that very flippantly, or some people do. Hopefully Christians don't use that very flippantly. But when we think about making a vow, when we think back what they're making a contract with God. And it's not something that would be easily dismissed or broken. And we'll see that from the reaction of even his daughter, who is the one who walks out the door. Spoiler alert there.
Oh, man,
sorry about that. I really screwed that up. But it was something very, very serious, especially to Yahweh. Now, Yahweh doesn't respond here. He doesn't say anything. Mm-hmm. Now, we'll go on and see whether or not the Lord does fulfill his vow. But we got to be careful in guessing that the will of Yahweh is, okay, I'm going to have the Ammonites conquered by Jephthah because he made this vow. Yep. Or is it because it's God's plan that the Ammonites be defeated? I don't know that this vow changed his mind. I think it's something very rash and something very normal. He's not commanded to make this vow. I do know that at least he recognizes Yahweh's power to give him victory, probably from knowing he does know the history of Israel very well and the conquest of the Promised Land and at least the journey to it. So he may know that many times in the past, Yahweh has allowed the people of Israel to conquer their enemies, sometimes without even a fight. And so that to me is interesting to see and to think about. But the making of a vow is something we ought to think about it like perjury. Okay, that's one of the most serious things you can do. I mean, you can beat somebody nearly to death and not go to prison for as long as you do for perjury on the witness stand. And so you swear an oath that you're going to tell the truth, and to violate that oath has very serious consequences. And for these people, the violation of an oath made to deity is even stronger. And so he's making a deal with God. And I know some people have done that maybe and look back even today and regretted it. I know, people that have really bad hangovers, so I swear to God, I'm never going to drink again. But they're using that very, very flippantly and very colloquially, and not this. He's not making just a rash statement here. He makes a rash vow, and I think it's interesting, as you said, what did he think was going to come out of his house? But the vow would be extremely serious to take a vow, especially with deity.
Yeah. You made a point a couple minutes ago about, hey, let's not just assume God's in agreement with everything that's occurring here just because it's recorded in Scripture.
Right. That's right.
The only reference that we have to God so far in the perspective, or maybe where he stands, is 29, where it says, "Then the Spirit of the Lord was upon him." Mm-hmm. How should we understand that phrase? What should we not understand it as?
Often Christians interpret it as the same thing as when the Holy Spirit came upon people and they spoke in tongues and prophesied, or they wrote inspired Scripture. I don't think that's the same thing. The Spirit of the Lord comes on Samson, and he's able to pull down the temple. The strength of the Lord was with him. I don't know that it gives him clairvoyance. I don't know that it gives him that he knows the mind of God and the will of God and that all these things, or that he's a miracle worker. I think it's just a way of saying that God was with him, and God's strength was with him. But I don't know that it gave him the ability. I don't know that it affected the taking of this vow, that the Spirit pushed him to make this vow, or, if the Spirit of the Lord came upon Jephthah, and Jephthah then knew nothing can touch me. I'm unbeatable. I'm going to go win this battle. Well, I make the vow.
Yeah.
There's no reason to make the vow then. So I think it's just a phrase really more than maybe we want to think it's something as a miraculous indwelling or something.
Yeah, I agree with you. And especially here in the book of Judges, it's really indicating that God's going to use this person to fulfill what he's doing for the people as a whole. And it does not equate to good character or the character matching God. You see that in most of the judges. They are flawed individuals. And it really captures where God's people are as a whole during this time, which is so far from God. And even in these moments where they come back to God, they're not in a good place when it comes to their understanding of the law and God dwelling with them. It's not a good time in Israel's history.
And we don't want to indicate that nowhere in the text does it mean that the Spirit of the Lord came on somebody and they didn't have some sort of supernatural ability. I mentioned Samson.
Oh yeah.
I don't want to say that, but we don't need to
equate that with
text.
Good morality.
I'm trying, as we're going to do as we go through, I don't try to read this text with a Christian lens or a 21st century lens. I try to read this text with the earliest I will go back to is a Second Temple Judaism lens. How did they understand that to be? How did the audience that this was written to? And I don't know exactly when Judges got into the form that we have it right here. I don't know who wrote Judges, but an ancient Israelite audience understanding that may have seen it a little bit differently than maybe we might look at it with the New Testament lens.
All right, Tim, do you want to read the rest of the story here? Do you want me to?
Am I reading the rest of the story?
34 through 40? Or I can.
I can't. No, I can. I think I've been boning up on my English. And so I've been able to read a little bit better. You'd be proud of me.
All right, good job.
All right, what are we going through?
34 through 40.
That's a monster.
If you need a tag me.
I might need to I might have to take a water break. All right, in verse 34, then Jephthah came to his home at Mizpah, and there was his daughter coming out to meet him with timbrels and with dancing. She was his only child, and he had no son or daughter except her. When he saw her, he tore his clothes and said, Alas, my daughter, you have brought me very low. You have become the cause of great trouble to me, for I have opened my mouth to the Lord, and I cannot take back my vow. She said to him, My father, if you have opened your mouth to the Lord, do to me according to what has gone out of your mouth, now that the Lord has given you vengeance against your enemies, the Ammonites. And she said to her father, Let this thing be done for me. Grant me 2 months, so that I may go and wander on the mountains and bewail my virginity, my companions and I. Go, he said, and he sent her away for 2 months. So she departed, she and her companions, and bewailed her virginity on the mountains. At the end of 2 months, she returned to her father, who did with her according to the vow he had made. She had never slept with a man. So there arose an Israelite custom that for 4 days every year, the daughters of Israel would go out to lament the daughter of Jephthah the Gileadite. Did I do good?
Good job, Tim. All right, so there's a lot to unpack here, a lot of different angles, and the different commentaries that I read in preparation of this, they each presented different theories and disagreed with different elements of this. But let's start with this discussion. What do you think he thought was going to come out of his house?
His kid. I mean, I don't know that we have his wife listed here. I don't think we're ever told. I'd have to go back and look at the earlier text if he's ever told that he has a wife. I know some people think maybe a slave. I'm not sure that this band of outlaws would have had the money to own slaves or had any reason to own slaves. Because remember, he wasn't like some wealthy landowner in Israel and a farmer before, or a livestock, person with practicing animal husbandry here before this story. He was the leader of a band of outlaws. And so I don't know why he would have had slaves. I've heard some people say, well, he thought maybe one of his livestock was going to walk out the door of his house. I don't know that I can agree with that. I don't know what was on his mind other than the fact that maybe he wasn't thinking, about what was going to walk out of his house. I'm trying not to interpret this using my heart, and my modern day aversion to human sacrifice, because that is not necessarily how ancient people would have viewed things. Human sacrifice is pretty normal, and we'll get into that. I say normal. It was not uncommon.
Yeah, we can go ahead and mention some of that.
Yeah, I mean, we remember when Abraham is told to go sacrifice Isaac, he doesn't question the Lord and say, wait a minute, we don't do human sacrifice. Of course, this is before Torah. We do see other places in the Bible, people who worship Molech, other gods do practice human sacrifice. And ultimately, God practiced human sacrifice when he had his son get killed on the cross.
Yeah, a few of those places, 2 Kings 3:27, 2 Kings 16:3, 2 Kings 21:6, all references to different occurrences. Yeah.
A little more common in a world that we don't understand the brutal nature of, and maybe that not everybody has the same feeling for human life, maybe not even attachment to children. He is obviously greatly grieved that his daughter walks out of the house. So I don't know what he was expecting. Maybe he's just an idiot for making the vow and not thinking about what that would be, because he doesn't act like, yeah, I expected you to walk out of the house when I came home to come out and meet me. Do you really think I believe that it's the household dog he expected to come out and meet him? I mean, it doesn't make any sense what he was thinking. That we don't know. We'll have to, I don't know if Jephthah's going to be in heaven or not, but we would have to ask him what that was that he was thinking of.
Yeah, some of the different theories I came across based on if you thought he actually killed her or not, but some of those were one that they think he actually meant to do a human sacrifice, but they think it would be like a slave or somebody like that. But we have,
which makes it all the better, which makes it all more acceptable.
We have no knowledge of. There's just so much missing of the story that we don't know to be able to like answer all those questions there. But they think, well, that's why he's trying to like mirror what some of the other nations would do of like, oh, if I did this, like this big sacrifice, then God definitely would give me victory. So some people think, oh, he meant a human sacrifice there, just not his daughter. Other people would say, no, it would be the livestock thing, which there's so many questions that come through this, that it was never meant to be a human. It was meant to be just an animal that he would like sacrifice to the Lord. But some people would then say, well, that doesn't seem like that much of a bargaining thing between him and God.
Yeah, it's a very normal sacrifice.
Yeah. So that seems,
assuming like we're going to talk about here in a minute, that Jephthah was a Torah obedient individual, which there's no reason to think he was.
Yes. And that's it. That was the other thing.
Yeah, the biggest thing is people go to the Hall of Faith there in Hebrews 11. They say, well, Jephthah's mentioned right along the noble and sinless David and Gideon and Solomon. Well, of course, I'm being facetious there. I mean, Solomon was a terrible sinner. Solomon directly disobeyed Deuteronomy 17 in two different places. He multiplied for himself great horses. As king of Israel, that's prohibited. He also multiplied for himself many wives, which is directly prohibited by Torah of the king of Israel. He also practiced idolatry and encouraged idolatry in high places. He's the reason the kingdom fell apart. People want to point, the only thing everybody wants to read about Solomon is when he figures out this deal with the prostitutes. What if women would have called his bluff? Would he have cut that baby in half? Obviously, one of the women had no problem with killing a baby because she was like, okay, that's what I'm telling you. It's an indication that maybe human life did not have the value in Israel that we do, because we can't think of, if that was going on today, in our court system and a judge proposed that, neither one of those two women would say, yeah, go and cut the baby in half. Because our ethics and morals do not, and it doesn't make any sense to do that. And he wrote all these proverbs of wisdom and everything, but he didn't use that wisdom in the long haul. And David was a sinful man. He may have been a man after God's own heart, but he was an adulterer. He was a murder conspirator, and his sons were terrible. And so I think we look at him as this flawless individual.
And you got Samson on that list as well.
Samson's on that list, and Samson is a male chauvinist pig and a complete jock-headed moron. And so, but he's on there, I think, because they were great warriors. Now, Solomon wasn't a great warrior. At least he didn't have to fight because David took care of all those things. But I think Jephthah's on here because he was a great warrior for the people of Israel.
And they still had moments of faith, and that's the purpose of that passage.
Brief flashes, yes.
Yes, like he had faith that God was the one that was going to deliver this. Now, that doesn't mean he was a good person, but at this time, God used him in his faith to accomplish the will of God. There is, like, from my understanding, Leviticus chapter 5, like maybe 4 through 6 there, it seems like the law provides a way out of a rash vow being made. If the individual would then realize, like, oh, that's going to lead to me causing a sin, like they could go make a sacrifice and be released of that vow. So, like, if he did know the Torah, like he would know, or he should have known that he didn't have to fulfill that vow. So I lean in the direction of, like, I don't think he knows the law very well. Like, yeah, why would he?
Son of a prostitute, an outlaw. He's not like he grew up in the tabernacle serving the Lord.
And, like, if he did, like, he wouldn't fulfill that vow if he actually knew, like, no, the God of Moses and Abraham, like, he doesn't want human sacrifices, and there's other ways to get out of the vow.
His daughter doesn't see a way to get out of the vow.
Yeah.
It's one of those things. If he was this upstanding individual, when the people came to, and this, this great figure of great virtue, when the people came to him, why did he just say, yeah, you know what, I forgive you for expelling me from your community and taking away my inheritance. I'll come help you out, and you don't have to do anything on my behalf. If he was chivalrous and virtuous, he wouldn't say, yeah, I'll do these things for you, but I've got a lust for power. I mean, that's what he asked for. He doesn't ask for that because God said, hey, I want you to go, when these people come to you, say that I want to be made head over you. That's not what we see. And this vow may very well be his greed and his ambition, if you will, is probably a better word, for being able to get what he told, what they made a deal for. And so I think we tend to look back at the Old Testament stories and assume that there's a Bible in every hotel room drawer and on every bedside and everybody's coffee table, and access to Torah was as easy as it is pulling up on your phone today to look at the Bible, when in fact there were probably in extremely limited numbers of the copies of Torah. Very few people were taught it. King Josiah, it gets dumped into gets lost in the times of the kings. Israel is unfaithful and unfaithful and unfaithful and unfaithful all through Judges. There's no reason for me to ever read Judges and think that Israel were faithful people. They don't carry out everything they're supposed to do anyway from Joshua. They don't conquer the promised land. They don't kill all the Canaanites. And then after Judges, there's only like maybe 3 or 4 kings of Judah that are any good and no kings of Israel that are any good. And Israel are terrible people. And so they're not Torah obedient as a people or a nation. There's no reason for me to think that Jephthah is some great scholar of Torah and would say, oh, no, the Lord would never let me make a human sacrifice.
Yeah. All right. So another question that comes up here is probably for most of our readers, they're kind of thrown off on why is the virginity emphasized here? Can you walk us through maybe?
Yeah, you're going to let me be the male chauvinist too. Okay, I get to be that.
I'm asking the questions here.
Okay, is that right? Okay. All right.
Walk us through, because that's going to be, the answer here may be hard for people to swallow as well, like, and understand. Like,
and I don't know that this is the answer in this particular case. I mean, what we read this as is that she's fixing to go join some convent somewhere, even though there's no such thing as a convent for women that I know of in the Old Testament, or being dedicated to the service of the Lord necessarily.
If she's not killed.
If she's not killed. Yeah. Some people say, well, no, really, she wasn't. She was just dedicated to the Lord. and therefore she could never have sex with a man. I don't know where that system is that a woman goes and dedicates herself to the Lord. A male I could see, like Samuel, for example, the first judge, to be able to see that. Bewailing virginity, definitely don't think she's saying, man, I'm never going to get the chance to have sex, and bewailing that. But my hypothesis would be this, and I don't know that I can back this up, but I can back this part up, but I don't know that it applies to this. It was extremely important for an ancient Near Eastern woman to bear children for her husband, and to bear children for the family. And in this particular situation, she is Jephthah's only daughter, only child. So he has no sons. And maybe he didn't have a wife. I don't know what happened to her. He doesn't seem like the type that may be this homebody. She's not going to be able to carry on the lineage of her father. She's not going to be able to marry somebody else in the clan and have a baby. And she's going to die childless, which is a horrific thing in the thought of women. Now, I know that maybe today it's offensive to say that you really think that the desire of these women was to bear children for their husband and that's their purpose in life. My answer is yes, it was. Because we see stories of barren women that are extremely ashamed about it. They feel like it's punishment from the Lord, and sometimes it is that the Lord has closed up their womb. Sarah is a good example of that. Hannah, she's ridiculed by her competition wife with Elkanah. Being barren was like a punishment because they believed that the deity regulated childbirth and reproduction, not just in the ancient Near East, but all the way through the ancient world of the Greeks and the Romans. And so I believe that she's never going to have children, and she's not going to complete what would be very, very important for a woman of her day to do, and that's to reproduce and have children for, obviously her dad's not going to be able to maybe have any more children, but she goes and bemoans that. Now, some people read this as that she's fixing to commit herself to serving the Lord. My response is, okay, in what capacity? What is she going to go do? Is she going to go work in the temple? I mean, it wouldn't be the temple. The tabernacle? Is she going to become a priestess? I mean, what avenue is there for her to go? And there's not like a convent that I know of that women could go and serve in. So I don't know. Now, perhaps there was some sort of cultic thing that maybe back in that day and time. Once again, I'm trying to read it like an ancient Israelite. And for me, I think she's bewailing her virginity because she knows she's going to die and not ever have the ability to reproduce a child. Mm-hmm. But I reserve the right to be missing that point.
Yeah, for her as an individual, and also what you were saying for their family as well. And that just seemed to be a very, very big deal for them. This year-by-year lament of her, we don't have record of it elsewhere in the Old Testament, so maybe it was think maybe more of like a local kind of thing, probably not all of Israel. We don't have any record of that.
Yeah, I don't think it continues in modern Judaism or even in Second Temple Judaism.
Or mentioned elsewhere, like in the Old Testament.
And the question has to be asked, what are they lamenting? Are they lamenting her being reconciled to a convent, or are they lamenting something a little more serious than that? I mean, 4 days of mourning annually is pretty heavy-duty mourning.
Yeah. So, Tim, when it comes to the big question here of when we read through this, there's a lot of unanswered questions, but do you feel like one way or the other whether or not she was killed, or is this one of those things to where we should just be cautious of really diving into one of the two theories and being too overly confident on what occurred?
Well, I'm not going to let my ethics and morals dictate the interpretation of this, because I find the sacrifice of having a daughter, just like you do, is the most repulsive thing and the most sadistic thing I could ever think about. I cannot let that drive my interpretation of the Bible, because I have no reason to believe that Jephthah was a Torah-abiding Israelite of his day when nothing in his background indicates that. I don't know a lot of things. It's like you said, to demand that we know something. There are hundreds of things in the Bible I can't demand that I know, but I believe that he carried out the sacrifice of his daughter, because that's how I think it would have been read. I know that it's embarrassing to later rabbis and others who, wonder why we don't have a firm answer here. the sadness that he has when he sees his daughter come out, the regret that we see, her accepting that something bad's going to happen, and he has to fulfill the vow, the bemoaning of the virginity, the lamenting of 4 days of mourning on an annual basis by the daughters of Israel. My question is, even if he didn't mean for her to be the one that walked out of the door, or he was just too blockheaded to think that that was the case, what did the people that don't think he killed her say that she went and did? How did he fulfill the vow? Because if I read the vow, there's no other way to fulfill it other than to make a burnt offering of whatever or whomever went out of the house. There's nothing linguistically to solve it either. I'm not an expert in Hebrew, so I looked at it in Hebrew. It's a participle. The one coming out is the way that I read the Hebrew participle. And then I looked over in Greek, and it uses a relative pronoun, hos. It means who, what, coming out of the house. You can't say whomever or whatever. That's a choice. That's a translator's grammatical choice.
And to add some comments on there, one argument that I had read was making the case that, it's a bad translation, that it really should say whoever and not whatever comes out of the house, of, he was expecting a person but not his daughter. And Tim saying there, like, hey, that's not clear from the language there.
No, I understand it's a Hebrew participle, which is a verbal adjective, if you will, that says the one coming out. It's got the definite article, definite article in front of it. And so now over in Greek, it does have a pronoun said there, but they're singular masculine, singular masculine pronoun. I don't think you can make a decision on that, regardless of that. What walked out of his house with his daughter. And so whether he was expecting that or not, to me, is irrelevant. It's what walked out of his house. The question is, did he fulfill the vow? I believe he did, because that's how I would have to understand the text. I don't think that's righteous. I don't think God excused it. I don't want to question Yahweh's ethics, that did Yahweh have the foreknowledge to know that it was going to be his daughter coming out of the house, and therefore he should have let him lose the battle so he didn't kill his daughter? You and I talked about this.
That was going to be my next question.
But I'll let you fill that in. I mean, one of the questions is, if we're going to get into this theology, which I don't get into, Yahweh knew he made this vow. Yahweh knew that his daughter was going to come out of his house. I'm not saying that that's right or wrong. I'm saying, and therefore Yahweh, if he wanted to do the right thing, which God always does the right thing, he should have let Jephthah lose the battle, because then he wouldn't have to fulfill the vow. You're on.
Thanks. That tension there is what I think why a lot of people lean towards, well, she didn't die, because they feel like in some way that if this vow is completed, then God's at fault in some way.
He's implicit in it.
But the reality of that is, like, I think it's hard for a lot of us to understand. And I know there's some that listen to this podcast that I'm sure have fought in wars, but for my generation and down, like, that has not been a reality for us to see that firsthand, of how barbaric sometimes fighting can be. Like, so when we look at this and we focus in on just this one individual, this one daughter being killed, and in reality, like, all through this book, people are dying for different reasons, most of which are mankind's fault, for breaking vows, for not treating one another right. Like, so it's easy for us to be like, oh God, why did you let him fulfill this vow, like, where he promised he was going to do this, which I think he was doing it to try to manipulate God to begin with. Like, but let's say God makes them lose that war. Well, more lives are going to be lost by that as well. Like, more of God's people would die there as well. So I just think it helps sometimes, I think, to look at the big picture and all angles to this. Like, it happens sometimes in our world today. Like, we'll feel more connected to Americans who die than people in other countries who die in war. Like, but the reality is that we're all still people that are dying. So you think of the Canaanites, like, I mean, the Old Testament battles are occurring. These are not wars that are not without death. You know what I'm saying? Like, every battle is people physically attacking one another and dying. So,
or the Lord killing them.
Yeah, or the Lord killing them. Mm-hmm. So I think we just have to be careful to say, well, this makes us uncomfortable. This is wrong. And it is wrong. But, like, people throughout history have the free will to make choices. And just because it's recorded here doesn't mean that God's placing a stamp of approval on this story here.
Oh, yeah. We can't say that God endorses everything that a human being does in Scripture. We struggle with this. I think people would struggle less than if it was his son that walked out of the house because it was a male.
Oh, yeah.
I think people really struggle because this is really the worst case scenario. His only daughter, a woman coming out, she's going to die a virgin if he does all this, how horrible it is. But let us not forget that, and I don't know why Yahweh didn't intervene or anything like that, or why didn't he speak up and say, Jephthah, I'm not going to accept your vow, because obviously a human being's going to walk out of your house.
And he had already provided a way out of that vow. Like,
yes. If Jephthah was aware of it, yes.
Like, but because of the people's neglect of the law, he was not aware of it.
Or his lack of access to the law. I mean, that's one of those things. Nobody was going to sit little Jephthah on their knee and teach him.
Yeah, I mean, the people as a whole.
The people, he wasn't around. If he had been brought up in Gilead by his dad, maybe he would have. There's a lot of things that bother us ethically and morally in the Old Testament. And maybe not just limited to the Old Testament. God commands the killing of women and children in the Old Testament. God carries out the killing of women and children in Gomorrah and Sodom and in the great flood of Noah. We have a real struggle with that. If we want to talk about what rubs us the wrong way in this story right here, then there's a lot of other things that by the command of Yahweh himself that rub us the wrong way if we want to be absolutely. Even the story in Acts of Ananias and Sapphira who are struck dead for just telling a lie rubs us the wrong way. It rubs me the wrong way. But I ultimately just have to resign myself that God gets to decide what's righteous and what's not, even though I don't judge it right. So I don't know why
judgment occurring before people die, we struggle with way more than judgment post-death. Like,
yes, we don't have, we sit there and talk about, and I almost think sometimes Christians wish people would go to hell that don't accept the gospel or that are mean or evil people, which is not what Jesus would teach in the Sermon on the Mount. But we don't have an issue with people being sent to eternal, horrific punishment in fire and gnashing of teeth. But we have a real problem with somebody dying in this life that seems very innocent. So this is tough to swallow, but I don't think that accepting the fact that he may have carried out this vow exactly like it said with the burnt offering of his daughter, we don't need to say it didn't cause Jephthah pain, but we also don't need to say that necessarily because a human being did it and it's recorded in Scripture, therefore God is endorsing it.
Yeah.
Because how many things do people do that God doesn't endorse in Scripture, but we just have the story of Israel laid out for us. And so I think he killed her. Most Jewish commentators agree with that. The rabbis seem very embarrassed about this story. I think what you see mainly is Christian commentary which is often poor when it's aimed at the Old Testament. But I'm fine. I respect those who may disagree with that. But like I said, I'm just trying to read it like a 9th century BCE Israelite would read it, if I could even read.
My final thought on this one is, when I think of Judges, I feel like the overall story is people keep messing up. They're evil. They're wicked. They're not following the law. And God remains being patient for them and continues to give them another shot. And I feel like this narrative captures the book of Judges there. Mm-hmm. You got any closing thoughts?
No, it's almost sad because when we read Joshua, in contrast to the wilderness generation, those people are ready to follow Joshua to the gates of hell itself and do whatever it takes, whatever the Lord asks us to do, march around a city, do this, do that. There's still people like Achan that do things that are wrong, but they really just seem like a great people. And then without leadership, and that's how Joshua ends and this book starts. After Joshua died, there's no king in Israel, and the people did as they pleased. And Judges, it just shows this roller coaster of people without leadership, and then they choose leadership like Jephthah. Why the Hebrew writer chose to use him as an example, I don't know the answer to that question. But I do not think that the use of a person, Abraham was a liar, and the Hebrew writer includes him. I don't think he's necessarily endorsing every action that they took by the fact that they're listed in the Hall of Faith.
Good thoughts there, Tim. If you have any questions or suggestions for future topics, let us know by emailing us at podcast@mountjuliet.org. To our fellow students of Scripture, thank you for joining us for tech support. We hope you will join us next week.
This is a podcast of the Mount Juliet Church of Christ. You can find more personal growth resources like this one at mountjuliet.org/resources. The Mount Juliet Church of Christ exists to glorify God and make disciples by helping people grow in Christ, love one another, and serve others.